Keeping the seat warm for him. I'm good. Well, no one else is sitting there. So. Cantorial. Yes. Thank you. Here's one. Here's one. Okay.
This will help. Just one moment of your time. As you all know, this is a season to nominate somebody you believe to be worthy of receiving the Lenore Kipper Talmud Torah Award. And the nominations are due by September 21st. I have forms. I know a lot of you have been bothered by me and have received several copies. If you need one, I'm happy to give you one. I'd like to give you one. If you have one and you have somebody in mind, please fill it out so that the committee will have it in front of it when it meets. But the deadline is November 21st. You can... September, excuse me, thank you. September 21st. There's 3 ways to get it filed. 1, you can either give it to me. 2, when Norman gets back, if he ever gets back from Oregon.
Next week,
you can give it to Norman. You can give it to Janet Baseman, or you can email it back. If you want a form, please raise your hand. If you haven't gotten one and you really would like to have one because you believe you have somebody who's worthy for consideration, I will be happy to give you the form. Okay. You know, without competition, you just never get, you always get somebody else. So, thank you.
All right.
It's the truth.
That's right.
Rabbi, can I just say one thing?
Sure.
So I first started to come to Torah Study about 20 some odd years ago, way back when, from a friend of mine who brought me here, Rabbi.
Okay, good Shabbos, everyone. Any more announcements? No? Okay. Hi to everyone who's watching at home. Hope you can hear me. Hope we'll make it past 10 o'clock on the live stream. We've set it up, but we'll see what happens. So,
Has there been a problem?
it's been cutting off at 10, but hopefully. Okay, here we go. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat l'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat l'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Bein Yuven v'nei Yisrael ot hi leolam. Leolam V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai es ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam Uvayom hashvi Shabbat vaynafash Shabbat vaynafash Shabbat vaynafash v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen Amen l'chaim. From water to wine. Okay. Torah portion. Oh yeah, blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so Torah portion this week is called Re'eh. And we're going to look towards the very beginning, but not the very beginning of the Torah portion, beginning with Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 1. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 1. So we're going to skip just a little bit, but you don't need the first part because Rabbi Greengrass talked about it last night. So if you heard that, you're good. If you didn't hear that, you have another chance next year when we get to it. All right. So this should be fun. I think. I think the topic that we're looking at should be fun and interesting. There's a difference in Judaism. Rabbi Heschel wrote a lot about this. The difference between time and place, and how we understand time and place. Talked about this at Alfred. You should be ready to go for this because we just talked about this in Miami. Similar idea. So this might be a little bit of a review, but hopefully you'll bear with me. When the Jewish people were wandering in the wilderness and they went to offer a sacrifice, you could do it wherever they wanted. You could do it in your backyard, by your tent, wherever you wanted. You could, if you slaughtered the animal correctly, according to the way that Moses told them to do it, and you offered the animal the way that it was taught, then that was fine. Once you got into the land of Israel, there's this intermediary period where the Jews are no longer in the wilderness, but the Holy Temple has not yet been built yet. It took a couple hundred years between the time that Joshua died and Solomon was born. All the period of the judges, and there was a long period there. And then you had the reign of King Saul, and then you had King David. And so it was a while the Jewish people were in the land of Israel, but didn't have the temple yet. So the question then is, well, when you're in the land of Israel, okay, in the wilderness you could offer sacrifices wherever you want. But when you're in the land of Israel, and you're only allowed to offer sacrifices in the Holy Temple, but there is no Holy Temple yet, where do you offer your sacrifices? And so the answer became, if it was a personal sacrifice, for example, if you sinned and you needed personal, just for you, repentance, or something great happened to you, you know, your son's getting married and you want to thank God. Okay, so if it's a personal for you, you could offer that kind of sacrifice wherever you wanted. But they did create what were called communal altars for the sacrifices that were on behalf of the whole community, like a pilgrimage holiday, or Yom Kippur, or Shabbat. And they moved from a couple of different places. The first one was at a place called Gilgal. Then they had one at Shiloh, and so forth. And eventually, through wars, they got destroyed, and it got moved, and so forth. And eventually, it was and that's where the ark stayed. Eventually, the ark came to Jerusalem, even before the Holy Temple was built, and King David kept it in his palace, which you can go and see. It's called today Ir David in Jerusalem. You can go and see where that palace was, and you can even go and see the area. Well, you can't go and see the area where they used to keep the ark that they just found excavated. I could see it because I went with an organization that wants me to give them your money. So for that reason, because of your money, I could go, but you can't. Yeah. Okay. So some of the newer excavations that aren't open to the public are beyond belief, and it's political, which is the reason why they're not necessarily. So anyway, that's a different issue. Once, though, the Holy Temple is finally built, then, for the first time in Jewish history, all sacrifices, no matter what, could only be in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And personal sacrifices, in and around, were now outlawed. So what happened was we moved from time to place, and place became central. And one of the reasons, well, I don't want to give it away yet, but the question is why? What's the difference? If I live in the Galilee, today, if you're in, the Galilee or the Negev, and you need to get to Jerusalem to offer a sacrifice, you hop on a bullet train, and you're there in an hour. But back then, if you lived in the Galilee, it took a long time to get to Jerusalem. And if you sinned and you had to schlep down to Jerusalem because you accidentally, stepped on a snake or something, or, whatever, or you accidentally bumped into someone and knocked your mother's tooth out, or whatever, sin you did by accident, that's a big schlep. Why can't you just offer your sacrifice right there in the Galilee? Why did everything become centered on Jerusalem when in the past, before that, the sacrifices were efficacious even without Jerusalem? So, this is the Torah portion of Re'eh. This is the Torah portion of Jerusalem. This is the Torah portion of Jerusalem. We're going to see that. It's mentioned 16 times. The city Jerusalem is not mentioned. The name Jerusalem is not mentioned once in the entire Torah. However, it's referred to. It's referred to. Now, we have two things we want to figure out today. One, one of the things we always say to the Muslims is, in the entire Quran, Jerusalem's not mentioned one time. You guys are addicted to it. You're obsessed with it. It's not mentioned one time. So they'll say, well, in the Torah, it's not mentioned either. So we have a couple of responses. One is, well, in the Tanakh, it's mentioned all the time. In the books of prophets and in the writings, it's mentioned all the time. But in the Torah, it's not mentioned even once by name. However, it's referred to. So first question we want to ask is, why did Jerusalem become so special? Why did it be that the temple had to be there? And from that point forward, once it was built, you couldn't offer sacrifices anywhere else. And two, why is it that they couldn't just say in the Torah, Jerusalem? Why do they have to keep hinting at it, but not actually saying Jerusalem? So that's what we want to try to figure out today. And when we do, we'll learn something very interesting, I think. Okay, so beginning with chapter 12, verse 1. Ed, okay, we ready?
Yeah.
12:1, here we go.
These are the laws and rules which you must carefully observe in the land that the Lord, God of your fathers, is giving you to possess, as long as you live on earth. You must destroy all the sites at which the nations you are to dispossess worship their gods, whether on lofty mountains and on hills or under any luxuriant tree. Tear down their altars, smash their pillars, put their sacred posts to the fire, and cut down the images of their gods, obliterating their name from that site.
Okay, so if you notice, in verse 1, it says, to perform these things in the land of Israel. So it doesn't say Israel, it doesn't say Jerusalem, it just says, looking at the Hebrew, Ba'aretz. Now remember we talked about that last time? There's a newspaper called Haaretz. Here it just says Ba'aretz, because when we say the land, we mean Israel. But it doesn't actually say Israel, it just says Ba'aretz, in the land. So in the land could mean anything. But we don't have this command that we need to destroy all of the idols and all the trees that people bow down to and all those things in the wilderness or in Egypt or in Assyria or in Babylonia or in Edom. It's only in the land of Israel that you have to keep it pure of all this idolatry. So I'm just showing you already we're focusing on what's happening in the land of Israel. Okay, here we go. Add a little more, please.
Do not worship the Lord your God in like manner, but look only to the site that the Lord your God will choose amidst all your tribes as his habitation, to establish his name there. There you are to go, and there you are to bring your burnt offerings and other sacrifices, your tithes and contributions, your votive and freewill offerings, and the firstlings of your herds and flocks.
Okay, so here we have verse 5, which says, Ki'im el hamakom, rather, only in one place, asher yivchar Hashem, that God will choose, the Lord your God will choose to that place. And then it says, well, what's going to happen in that place? That's the place where you're going to go and bring your offerings and all of your sacrifices and stuff. So what we see here is the Torah is telling us it used to be that you could offer your sacrifices wherever you wanted, but once God tells you the place that he's going to choose, somewhere in the land of Israel, only there can you offer your sacrifices. Okay, so now we've just pinpointed, we went from Ba'aretz, anywhere in the biblical borders of the land of Israel, to one specific place where it's going to be that you're going to offer your sacrifices. Now, we haven't said that yet. So if you're going to... Now, remember, who's hearing this? Jews in the wilderness. They don't know the difference between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. They don't know anything about it because they've never been there. They only know what the spies told them, which is there's big pomegranates and lots of people who want to kill you. Which is a good way of explaining it today, too. Only now, we have like other fruits and stuff, like maybe avocado, whatever. But the people who want to kill you are still there. So, but we didn't say yet Jerusalem. We just said the place that God will choose. Okay, so I just want to point that out. Let's keep going a little bit more.
Together with your households, you shall feast there before the Lord your God, happy in all the undertakings in which the Lord your God has blessed you.
Okay, now there's one word here, usamachtem, and you shall rejoice in all that you've undertaken. Have you ever heard that word, samachtem? Maybe not, but you probably know the word simcha, or sameach. Yom huledet, sameach, joy. You shall rejoice. Well, there's another place in the Torah where it says, and there's a song about it, usamachta bechagecha. You ever? V'samachta bechagecha, v'samachta bechagecha. I recognize you never heard it, but trust me, it is a song. And it means, and you shall rejoice bechagecha, on your chag. Well, we know that on our chagim, chagim translates to pilgrimage. We use it today for holiday for everything. We say holiday for everything. But chag really meant pilgrimage. The three pilgrimage holidays are Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And those were the times where everyone had to pilgrimage. What does that mean? They had to go to Jerusalem. But what did they do in Jerusalem? Samachtem. They rejoiced. It was a big holiday. So now we know that in the place that you're going to bring your offerings and the place where you're going to have your big rejoicing where the pilgrimage was is going to be in one place. Now in the Torah it doesn't tell us where that is, but looking back through history, everybody knows it happened in Jerusalem. So it's referring to Jerusalem. Everyone knows that, but the Torah doesn't tell us that. Okay, a little bit more.
You shall not act at all as we now act here, every man as he pleases, because you have not yet come to the allotted haven that the Lord your God is giving you.
Right, do you see that? Now you can offer your sacrifices wherever you want, but once we get to Israel, that's over. Okay.
When you cross the Jordan and settle in the land that the Lord your God is allotting to you, and he grants you safety from all your enemies around you, and you live in security, we're still waiting on that a little bit, but then you must bring everything that I command you to the site where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name.
Okay, do you see that again? The place where he chooses to establish his name. Now trust me when I tell you, you've seen it twice, but if we keep reading through this, you're going to see that expression 14 more times, and 21 times total in the book of Deuteronomy. That it's mentioned, there's going to be this place where God will choose for his name to dwell. Okay, so 16 times in this Torah portion, we have a reference to a place that would later end up being known as Jerusalem, but not one time is Jerusalem mentioned, or are we told exactly where that place is going to be? Yeah, use the mic.
Is God to lead us to the spot in Jerusalem where Solomon builds the temple, or just Jerusalem?
Okay, so perfect segue. Perfect segue. How do you know that in where the holy temple was, and on top of the Temple Mount, in the area where they put the Ark of the Covenant, that was the place that the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be? Maybe it was somewhere in western Jerusalem. Maybe it was at the address of 6 Jabotinsky in Rehavia, which is the building that I used to live in. Maybe that's where it was supposed to be.
Still there.
I mean, they knew that eventually something amazing would happen in that building, but that was something else, maybe. Okay, so perfect segue. So now we have to ask ourselves, well, what do we know about Jerusalem from earlier in the Torah? Where did things happen in Jerusalem earlier in the Torah? And if you ask yourself, when were the Jewish people in Jerusalem, the answer is never. But if you ask yourself, when was the first family of the Jewish people, the matriarchs and patriarchs in Jerusalem, they were there all the time. Right? Okay, so you remember there are already some things, some paradigms that happened in Genesis. And remember the expression, Maaseh la'avot simon lebanim. Have you ever heard this before? Maaseh avot simon lebanim. Maaseh avot, which means something that happened to the matriarchs or patriarchs, is a paradigm, a siman, a sign for banim, for future generations. So in other words, almost everything in Genesis that happened to the matriarchs and patriarchs is meant to be, according to Jewish tradition, a paradigm for the future of Jewish history. You could take it or leave it, but it's an idea. But here it happens, we already have situations where major things, including one very specific major thing, happened in Jerusalem. Okay, so if you look, and I want to show you 2 of them. You mentioned one of them, but there's 2. So, by the way, where is the first time in the entire Tanakh, not Torah? You know the difference between Tanakh and Torah? All right, you know more than my undergraduate students then at University of Miami? The difference between Torah and Tanakh? Anybody?
Psalms of the Kings.
Right, so Tanakh means what we would call in English the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians would call the Old Testament, which means it includes all the books of the prophets and all the writings. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, all that stuff. Torah just means the 5 books of Moses. So within the 5 books of Moses, the stuff that according to tradition Moses wrote down, as God dictated him, Genesis through Deuteronomy, Jerusalem's not mentioned one time. But where then is the first place in the Tanakh, in the prophets, that Jerusalem is first mentioned? So you have it right here, Joshua 10:1. So if you look at the top of the sheet, this is the very first place where Jerusalem is ever mentioned. Now remember, it didn't take very long, because Joshua was the one who took over for Moses. So even before, a couple hundred years before King David lived and conquered Jerusalem and, built it as a Jewish city, Jerusalem is already mentioned in the Bible in the book of Joshua. And here's what it says. When King Adonai Tzedek of Jerusalem learned that Joshua had captured Ai and proscribed it. Now, you know who lived in Ai? Remember who lived in Ai? The original pirates, right? Ai, right? Original pirates. Or, I don't know. It's all like, yeah, they could be from a few. And proscribed it. You know, it's funny. You're used to my humor. I mean, you know, you already have the eye roll down. But you should see these like 19 and 20-year-old college kids when I make a joke, and they're just like, "What is this class? Like, what is going?" They just, it's a little different than their other teachers. Okay, treating Ai and its king as he had treated Jericho and its king, that moreover the inhabitants of Gibeon had come to terms with Israel and remained among them. So we first see that there already is a place called Jerusalem. Before the Jews ever get there, it's already named Jerusalem, and it has a name of a king whose name sounds pretty Hebrew. Right? Look, what could be more Hebrew than Adonai Tzedek? I mean, that's like the most Hebrew name you could think of. Tzedek, and the most Jewish name. Tzedek. Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdov. Tzedakah. Adoni, which means my master. Like a master. So there already is, now, according to the Malbim, who's an 19th century German rabbi who wrote a very interesting commentary on the Torah, all of the kings who lived in Jerusalem were given the nickname either Adonai Tzedek or Melchi Tzedek, which is a very Hebrew, and they were righteous people. So what is ironic is that of all the other Canaanites and people who are living in the land of Israel, the only ones who are not idol worshipers, but aren't part really of the Jewish line, are these group of kings who live in Jerusalem. And the reason why, according to tradition, is because they descend from a guy named Shem, the son of Noah. And Noah, even though he wasn't the first Jew, was a monotheist. Did believe in one God. So it's not surprising then that he had one of his three sons actually followed in his footsteps, Shem, and believed in one God. And the area that he was the caretaker of that line, happened to be Jerusalem. So that God placed someone in Jerusalem while the rest of the country was burning with idolatry. Jerusalem was kept holy through the line of Shem. So, because otherwise you'd ask yourself the question, why is there a monotheist with a Hebrew name who's the king of Jerusalem before the Jews even get to Jerusalem? And why is it already called Jerusalem? Why? Yerushalayim is Hebrew. Why does it have a Hebrew name? There's no Jews there. Okay, so that's what we learned from Genesis 10:1. Now, another king, the truth is, originally it wasn't called Jerusalem. It was called Shalem, or in English, Salem. It was in Oregon. Or Massachusetts, or pretty much any city. Any state has. There are a lot of Salems. But why are there a lot of Salems? Because they take their name from Jerusalem, which is interesting. Why in Massachusetts and Oregon did they choose to name it Salem and not Jerusalem? Yeah, Jerusalem might have sounded too Jewish. I don't know. Easier to spell. Yeah, it's easier. Okay, so the first time that we in the Torah ever learn about this place called Jerusalem, although it's referred to by its original name, Salem, is in Genesis 14:18. And this is when Abraham is there. And King Melchizedek, who Rashi actually says is Shem. If you look at the next source, and Melchizedek, a midrashic explanation that Rashi's actually quoting here from the Talmud, Nedarim 32b is Talmud, he's identical with Shem, the son of Noah. Why is he called Melchizedek? Because all of the kings were either called Melchizedek or Adonai Tzedek, which is not unusual. All the kings in Egypt were called Pharaoh. Right? When it says Pharaoh, who are you talking about? We don't know. A new Pharaoh arose. Which one? What was his name? Oh, his name was also Pharaoh. It's like that Bob Newhart show. This is my brother Daryl. This is my other brother Daryl. It's weird that two brothers are named Daryl.
George Foreman. How about George?
Yeah. Okay. So, you don't remember that? This is my brother Daryl? Yeah, it's old school. I can't believe I didn't even know that. So, Melchizedek, it's like saying the king. That's what they called the kings. It's like saying Pharaoh or Sultan or, whatever it is that you call the leader. But what's more interesting to us is, well, two things are interesting. One, in this verse, he turns out to be a good person because he greets Abraham with bread and wine, which is a nice thing to do. And also, look at his occupation. He was a priest of the actual God, not of some other God. Remember, Yitro was like a Midianite priest. He was a foreign priest. Now, what's interesting about this is he was a priest, but Aaron isn't. At the time of Abraham, Aaron's not going to be born for another 300-400 years. The idea of priesthood doesn't exist yet. There is no Torah yet. There are no Kohanim yet. There are no sacrifices yet. What is this guy doing as priest? So if you asked him, it's a living. It's a living, yeah. I mean, what else are you going to do? He didn't want to make shoes. So I said, I'll be the priest. All we know is he's some sort of religious leader. He's a king, but he's also religious. What did religious mean back then? Pretty much nothing, except for one thing. He was monotheist. So, when he saw Abraham, he said they had a connection. So he went out, but what I'm telling you is, Abraham at this point was in Jerusalem. And it just so happened that we're already building from the time of Genesis this idea that the spiritual home of the land of Israel, the one place that God protected as a monotheistic bastion, the one place that Abraham went when he had to do holy things was Salem. Okay, now, why then did it become Jerusalem? Where did the Jeru come from? I think we've talked about this before, but it's good to review for the purposes of this class because Re'eh is centered on that place. And so we're asking the question, well, what is that place? Well, retrospectively, of course, we know it's Jerusalem, but the Torah doesn't tell us that. And if someone ever comes to you and says, the Jews have no claim on Jerusalem, just like the Muslims, because there's no Jerusalem on the Quran, and they say there's no Jerusalem in the Torah, we say, you don't understand Parshat Re'eh, because on August 31st, you didn't come to this class. And chas v'shalom, anyone should think that we don't know, chas v'shalom means God forbid, we don't know why Jerusalem is our holy city when it is. Okay? We didn't make it up in the year 600. It's been there from the beginning. Okay? Not that this is a political class. For that, come to lunch and learn next week. We'll get into that. Rather from a religious point of view. So here's the famous Midrash. Although before we do that, before we look at the Midrash, look at Genesis 22:2, the second to last source on the first sheet. This is just a verse from Genesis. And here's what it says. Take your son, your favorite one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. So, Moriah used to be a hotel in Jerusalem called the Moriah Hotel. Today it's the it's changed to the Dan Panorama. It's ironic because when I first started going to Israel with my parents, we would refer to the Moriah as the hotel you would never go to. It's terrible. And then when I got a little bit older, and I was the one paying for it, that was the hotel that you would go to. But then when I got a little bit older, and I could go to Israel on your dime, now I would never stay there. Yeah, that's the progression of my life. Yeah.
OPM.
Okay. All right. So, what is Moriah? Moriah, the ya at the end comes from God. But if you forget the Moriah, the ya part, and just take Morah, Morah is teacher. Morah rhymes with Torah. Torah means the teaching. How do you say parents in Hebrew? Paul's not here. Horim. Horim is a parent. Parents, plural. So now we refer to parents as ima and abba, mother and father. But if I was going to say in Hebrew parent, masculine, the word would be horeh. And now Torah and Morah Torah is in the female. If it ends usually the word is a female word. And if it ends in Hebrew, then it's a masculine word. So Torah is a female word. Morah is a female teacher. A masculine teacher would be moreh. Moreh, morah. Torah. There is no word Torah, but because the Torah is singular. It's only one thing, and it's a female word. So a parent then would be horeh, and a masculine parent, and a female parent would be horah. So morah, Torah, horah. I know this guy in Israel who teaches this when he says morah, Torah, and horah is female for a female parent. So he'd say your mother's a horah. Because horah is, you don't have to, look, it's how he teaches it. It happens to be hilarious, but if you don't get it, it's not my problem. But why is the mountain called Moriah then? Moriah, because a parent, a Torah, and a Morah all do the same thing. Teach. Your parent teaches you, the Torah teaches you, your teacher teaches you. It's all the same root. Morah, Torah, and Horah, they're all the same root in Hebrew. Okay? Moriah is the mountain where you're taught. Now, you might say it should be Mount Sinai, but we don't say that. Think about it. Listen closely. Eitz Chaim Hi Lama. Wait, that's the wrong part. That's not the part I want to sing. Oh, it's this word. Listen closely. Ki mitzion teitzei tov. Oh, so you've heard it.
Once in a while, usually once a
So,
year.
Ki mitzion, because from Sion, Zion, teitzei went forth. Teitzei from the same root as hamotzi. Hamotzi, the bread comes forth. Teitzei, go forth. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. From the Mount of Zion came forth the Torah. We don't sing. Why don't we sing? Ki mitzinai te. Nobody does that. We say Ki mitzion. Because the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, but once the Jews got to Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin used to sit on Mount Sinai, and they were the ones who would teach Torah, and they were the ones who would make all the rulings, and it was from Mount Zion that Torah was taught. Yes, it was given on Mount Sinai, but it was taught for the rest of Jewish history and it was, it was never supposed to end. The temple wasn't supposed to be destroyed. It was supposed to be the Sanhedrin would sit there forever, and from there, that's where Torah is taught. Mount Zion is a nickname for Mount Moriah. Okay? So which one is Mount Moriah? Well, all we know is from Genesis 22:2, it's where Abraham took Isaac, and it's on a mountain in the land of Moriah. Moriah is Jerusalem. That's why the Moriah Hotel, was in Jerusalem. I think eventually they had some other ones too. Now they're all, I think, bought by the Dan chain. Now you can say the Dan Panorama. Now, what's the panorama? Chances are the room that you're going to have there, the panorama view, is of the parking lot. Almost guaranteed. Almost guaranteed. But it's a beautiful panorama. You can see every car. Now, one of the things that we see here is there you're going to offer Isaac as a burnt offering. Now, we know that he didn't actually do it, but the place that he put him down and the place where he then offered the ram, that was the inauguration of the altar. And from that point forward, that spot was holy. And that's why the Holy Temple had to be there. And where that was, we know, was in Jerusalem. So if anyone ever says, well, why is Jerusalem not mentioned in the Torah? You say, well, because it used to be called Salem. And then it was also called Moriah. But everything happened there. Everyone knows that. Everyone agrees on that. By the way, the Christians and the Muslims agree on that too. Everyone agrees.
Isn't that the rock where Muhammad was?
Yeah, the rock that's in the Dome of the Rock. I tell the 7th graders why it's called the Dome of the Rock. The ones who've never been to Israel, because that's where they play basketball. It's sponsored by the Hard Rock Casino. And they say, oh, that's great. Okay, so here's the story. How did it become Jerusalem? So look at Genesis Rabbah, the middle of the first page. Judy, would you mind reading there? Abraham called it.
Abraham called it Jerusalem.
Okay, so what that means is he didn't call it Jerusalem. He called that place, which is today known as Jerusalem, Yireh.
Yireh.
Okay.
As it is stated, Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will see. Yireh. Shem called it Shalem, as it is stated, Melchizedek, king of Shalem. That's Genesis 14:18. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, if I call it Yireh, as Abraham called it Shem, a righteous man will have a complaint. If I call it Shalem, Abraham, a righteous man, will have a complaint. Instead, I shall call it Yerushalayim, as both of them called it, Yireh Shalem, Yerushalayim.
And that's it. That's how the name came about. So what Abraham said was, when he went up the mountain, and he had the experience of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, and then he had the experience of sacrificing the ram, he recognized that this was going to be the prototype, like the inauguration of where Jews would bring sacrifices for all time. And so he said, this place should be called Yireh. By the way, Yireh, because it means he will see. This is the place where God will be seen. Yireh. What's the name of this week's Torah portion? Ra'eh. Yireh. Ra'eh. Sound familiar? It's the same root. Yireh means he will see. Ra'eh means see. Right? At the beginning of the Torah portion starts, Ra'eh. See, I place before you life and curse. But did you just see what just happened? It just so happens that the name that Abraham gave Jerusalem, Yireh, happens to be the name of the Torah portion, or the same root of the same word of the Torah portion, where we learn where that place is going to be. Do you see that? Does everyone see that? It's unbelievable. I mean, it's incredible. But if you don't understand the Midrash, and you don't understand why Abraham gave that the name, then you miss that. And if you don't recognize that Ra'eh is the Torah portion where it's mentioned 16 times that we're referring to that specific place, then you miss that. And if you say, well, I don't believe that Abraham ever made up that name, Yireh, well then, okay, fine. Then why isn't the place still called Salem? Who calls it Salem? Literally no one on the planet. Everyone knows the place is called Jerusalem. Well, where'd the Jeru come from? Abraham. He was the first Jew who was there. It was pretty incredible. Okay, so now we've answered the question of where is this place? I think we've answered the question, because in this week's Torah portion we look at 16 different times where it says the place that God will choose. And so historically, obviously it's Jerusalem, but even from the hints that we had, the 2 hints that we had in Genesis, from Salem and from Moriah, we recognize that this is Jerusalem, and there's no dispute about that. Everybody knows that that place is called Moriah. Everyone knows that mountain is called Zion. There's no dispute about that. But the other question we haven't answered, by the way, Rashi tells us from the Jewish point of view, there's some evidence in the book of Chronicles. So if you just look at just one more Rashi, and then I want to answer the next question. The next question is, so why didn't they just say Jerusalem in the Torah? Why do they have to hint at it? Why do they have to, dance around it? Why can't we just say, look, the place that you're going to go to is called Jerusalem? We'll get to that. But before we do that, the last Rashi on the place, Ken, would you mind reading that?
By
The
way-
land of Moriah.
By the way, Commissioners Pine and Crest established a village we're in, which is why it's called Pinecrest. Okay. All right. Okay.
I heard a local comedian, and he is an African American guy, very funny, and he said, I don't live in Pinecrest. I don't live in this fancy area. He goes, I'm from Pinecrest. Yeah, I'm from Pinecrest. It was really funny. So,
Okay.
All right, anyway.
All right, the land of Moriah. This is Jerusalem, and so we find in Chronicles to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem in Mount Moriah.
Right, so we have some evidence from the book of Chronicles that Moriah is Jerusalem. Okay. So if you want to go back a little bit further. Okay.
Our rabbis have explained that it is called Moriah instruction because from it, that is from the temple built on that mountain, instruction, Horah, came forth to Israel, Genesis Rabbah. Onkelos translates it by, quote, the land of the divine service, unquote. He takes it as having reference to the offering of incense brought in the temple of Moriah, in which there were myrrh, nard, and other spices.
Right, so, Onkelos, in his first translation of the Torah into Aramaic, said, if you look at the word Moriah, you also see another hint about Jerusalem, because Moriah, everyone knows the same root as Torah, but Mor, which is the beginning of Moriah, is the Hebrew word for incense, which was put on every sacrifice. So that's like another hint that we're referring to the place where the sacrifices were. Richard?
Is there any tie-in of this geographic space to the spot where Moses is Panim Panim and he wants to see God's face and he says, hold out in this rock here and I'll pass by?
Well, that was at Mount Sinai.
Right. This?
Well, this is Mount Zion. Right, so that was in the world. Yeah, now, but what you could say is there a connection to when Moses went up the mountain at Mount Nebo and God showed him the land of Israel? What exactly did he show him? And obviously he would have showed him, you would think, Jerusalem. So, Mount Nebo, yes. Mount Sinai, no. Okay, blessing. Okay, so, yeah, please. Can you use the mic?
I wasn't sure what nard was that's mentioned here. And it's interesting, apparently it's an aromatic Himalayan plant, believed to be spikenard. So, yeah, some sort of aromatic spice or oil. I've never heard the word nard.
Where do you see that? I'm not sure where you're looking.
In the Rashi, after myrrh,
Oh.
nard, and other spices. The fact that it's from Himalaya.
Oh, nard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
But apparently it's a Himalayan plant.
It's like a sea salt. Yeah. Himalayan. Yeah. Use
Early in our Jewish education, I recall that Jerusalem was selected as the capital by David, having nothing to do with the history we have in front of us in Deuteronomy. It's a whole different paradigm, and he picked it for a number of reasons, strategically and politically. And now we learn that it has more of a religious significance.
No, so it goes back further. Why did David end up in Jerusalem? Because David is from the tribe of Judah. And the territory where it just so happens that the kings are going to get happens to be in and around Jerusalem. But the reason he's there. Now, you know what's really amazing? I don't have enough time. You know what's amazing is if you go to Israel and you take a tour of the city of David, And they take you, there's an area where they'll take you up on like an overlook, and you see a valley.
Yeah.
And that valley is the valley that leads to Bethlehem. And David grew up there as a shepherd. So if you're a shepherd, you get to know the terrain real well. So that area where he was a shepherd, the area of the valley that leads from Bethlehem to where the old city of Jerusalem is today, where the adjacent city of David is, David would have known that area more than anyone. And when David led the Jews into Jerusalem through the water shaft to go up and defeat the Jebusites and conquer the land, the reason he was able to do that was because he was an expert in the terrain. He knew where the water shafts were. He knew where everything was. And so, you're standing there and you look over and you say, David grew up in this area. And then you're standing by the water shaft and you said, this is the way they came in and this is how they did it. Of course he knew it. So you say, how could he have known where that was? Because he grew up there shepherding. And when you stand there looking at it, it's unbelievable. But you have to have the right guide. So like if you go on a trip to Israel, but you don't go with me, the trips that I put up that nobody signs up for and that we cancel, like if you don't go on one of those, you miss a lot of the good stuff. So, okay, so now who else was in Judah? 2 other tribes, Benjamin and a smattering of Levites, because the Levites were spread out. But in the south, you had Benjamin, Judah, and Levi. So if you look now, I just want to show you a quick Rashi, and then we'll get to something very interesting. Rashi says here, Deuteronomy 33:12, of Benjamin. Because the blessing given to Levi referred to the temple service, and that of Benjamin to the temple being built in his territory, he mentioned one after the other. So, the point I'm making is, Jerusalem was apportioned to the Benjaminites and the Judahites, and the Levites lived there too, even though they didn't get the land, but that was because of their job and their special privileges. But no tribe was allowed to have the temple of Israel. Was allowed to have the Holy Temple, same as Washington, D.C. It was not meant to be in any state. I mean, it's Virginia and Maryland, but it's not. And this was Levi and Benjamin, but it's not. Right? It's like this. But if you look on a map and you say, well, what is that area that's in between what the Benjaminites got and what the Judahites got? It's the old city of Jerusalem. So even if you don't want to say, well, yeah, some people thought it was Moriah and maybe it was Salem, but how can you really say it was Jerusalem? Everybody knows what is between the part of land that Moses specifically says, here's where the Judahites are going to live, and here's the part where the Benjaminites are going to live because God told him. Well, what's in between? Where the old city of Jerusalem is. So from Rashi, we know that as the lands were apportioned, that was the place that was in between where those 2 tribes were. Now, here's the question. This is hopefully a fun answer. Why is it then, after all that's said and done, it would have been a lot easier for Jews going forward if we could just say, look in this verse and it says Jerusalem. And we can do that once we get to Joshua. We can do it all through the prophets, but we can't do it in the Torah. And the question is why? The answer comes from Maimonides. Not from the Mishnah Torah that we usually look at, but from his philosophical treatise called The Guide for the Perplexed, or in Hebrew, the Moreh Nevuchim. This is Maimonides' philosophical treatise known as The Guide for the Perplexed. I wrote it here in Hebrew, the Moreh Nevuchim, and it says here the fact. Ken, can you read that? Do you have or someone have a mic? Or Joe, can you read it? Where it says the fact that the Torah?
I got it. The fact that the Torah does not make specific mention of it, Jerusalem, but rather hints at it and says, Machom, the place which God will choose, etc., appears to me to have 3 explanations. The first, so that the nations would not seize the place and wage power struggles over it, knowing that this place, out of the entire land, represents the ultimate purpose of the Torah.
Right, so if Moses would come forth and say, look, it's Jerusalem, and it's right there, the other nations might go and destroy it. You know, or they might go and put a bastion there so that the Jews could never get it. Is it beyond the realm of possibility that our enemies would do something to prevent us from going to Jerusalem? I mean, this has been happening for the entire history of the world. So Maimonides says, if we would say Jerusalem, we would tip our hand a little bit. Okay, so that's reason number one. There's two more.
Secondly, thirdly, the strongest reasons of all, that the situation would...
No, you skipped a line. Secondly, lest.
Oh, lest whoever possessed it at the time destroy it and devastate it to the limit of their power.
Right,
and
so like if someone finds out how important it is to it, they might,
Destroy it.
burn it or raise it or, whatever. Okay, so that's number two.
Thirdly, the strongest reason of all, that a situation would not arise in which every tribe would want it included in its inheritance.
Right, because the tribes would fight over it. And even if God said, well, no tribe is going to get it, they still might fight over it. And we needed to prevent Jews fighting with each other. Okay, but you're not so good at that yet either. Okay. Keep going.
So as to be able to rule over it, it would fall to whichever tribe would emerge victorious as a result of a controversy and strife, as did the quest for the priesthood. For this reason, we are commanded that the temple not be built until after the coronation of a king, so that there is is one single ruler and all strife falls away.
Right, because you remember in the time of the Maccabees, the priesthood was usurped, and people who weren't from the direct line of Aaron became priests. We ended up having priests named Jason, right? And I was like, what? It was really a thing. Why? Because they took Greek names, and they started to bring in Greek practice into the Holy Temple, and that's what ultimately led to the destruction of the Second Temple. In the years, the Maccabees were great, but their ancestors were terrible. Their ancestors became idol worshippers and assimilated into Greek culture. Okay, so now another law. Here's a halacha. This is from Maimonides. I'll just read it real quick. Israel was commanded to fulfill 3 mitzvot upon entering the land of Israel. This is from Maimonides' Mishnah Torah. First thing they had to do, as we read in Deuteronomy 17:15, appoint a king. The very first thing the Jews had to do was appoint a king. 2, they had to wipe out Amalek, the people who were there always to destroy them. And 3, only after they appointed a king, and only after they got rid of this one nation that was trying to wipe them out, only after that did they build the chosen house? Did they build the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple? So a good question is, why? Why is it so important that before we build the temple, we have a king? Now, in order to answer that question, I have to give you just a little bit of background. So, what happened after the Jews came into the land of Israel? They didn't immediately have the temple. It took several hundred years. And in the meantime, they didn't have a king yet. Saul wasn't for a while. So in the intermediate period there, they had a different type of leader who were called judges. Right? There's a whole section in the Tanakh called judges. There were 12 of them. People like Samson, Gideon, Deborah, Ehud. A whole 12 of them. Who were they? What would happen was the Jews would sin. And this is according to the Bible. The Jews would sin. Because of that, they would be attacked. They're on the verge of defeat. They'd cry out to God. They would repent. God would send someone to help them. And that person, generally a military person, would then save them. But at that point of the judges, the Jews lived in separate tribes. And they didn't always even get along. Sometimes they had skirmishes with each other. But they were very disconnected. And each tribe was to its own. Finally, they said, we'll never survive this way. If we're not united, as much as we don't really even like each other and we're not getting along so well, the Egyptians are right there, the Assyrians are right there, the Babylonians are right there. They're going to kill us if we don't unite. There's only one thing that can unite us, a king. And at that point, they went to Samuel and said, you got to give us a king. So they got a king. The king united them. Now that we have a king, we have King Saul. He didn't turn out so well. Then we had King David. He turned out better, but he had a lot of blood on his hands. Then he had Solomon. Shalom, a man of peace, could finally build the temple, and now we have the temple. So once we got the kings, we made our way towards the temple, but before the kings, there was no temple. And the Jews were not united. Once we get the king, we can have the one thing that's needed for the temple: Jewish unification. Without Jewish unification, you can't have the temple. Because what happens in the temple? In the temple, you have the pilgrimages. And in the pilgrimages, we all get together and go to Jerusalem, v'samachtem, and we celebrate. Well, who's going to celebrate with other people that you have nothing in common with? We have to be united. So look at Psalm 122, a song of ascents of David. I rejoiced when they said to me, we are going to the house of the Lord. Our feet stood inside your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem built up, a city knit together, to which tribes would make pilgrimage, the tribes of the Lord, as was enjoined upon Israel, to praise the name of the Lord. There the thrones of judgment stood, thrones of the house of David. Pray for the well-being of Jerusalem, like Shalu Shalom Yerushalayim, famous expression. May those who love you be at peace, which means to say, when all of us Jews can go to a place and in the land of Israel, and each of us recognize that none of our tribes own this place, then we can be united. See it? And then, now that we have a king who can control us, now we can build the temple. We can all come here and be united. And that was the point of the pilgrimage. The point of the pilgrimage was everyone was together. So let me make one last point now. All that's why Jerusalem was not in the Torah, why it's only later, and that's the whole history of Jerusalem. But now a point. And by the way, there's a holy divinity about Jerusalem that goes back even before, that goes back to creation, but that's a different class. But for this class, a point to conclude. I started off by saying that when they were in the wilderness, they could offer sacrifices wherever they wanted. But once they got to Israel, they had to pick a place where they could have all the communal sacrifices together. First it was Gilgal, then it was Shiloh, but ultimately it became the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. But the reason why the religious stuff had to be in Jerusalem with everyone offering the sacrifices in the same place, the same way, was because what the other nations did was they all had their own idols and they could do it wherever they wanted. But let's say there are people over here in, Cairo, and they worship one way. And there are people over here in Alexandria, and they worship another way. Well, let's say that happens to the Jews. Let's say the Jews in the Golan, they worship one way, but the Jews over here in the Negev, they do it a completely different way. Pretty soon you got two different religions. And so the idea was that Judaism and the way we do Jewish needs to be the same for everybody, or else we will break up into lots of different pieces and we won't have a tradition anymore. And one of the challenges that we have as liberal Jews, meaning Jews who are not Orthodox, is that we've given too much autonomy to Jews to do it however the heck you want. And when you do it however the heck you want, you come to a world where you start to say, I don't really have a connection to the mitzvahs. I like the bagels. I like the lox. I'll go to the high holy days. But when you say Rambam, I don't know what you're talking about. When you say Moreh Nevuchim, I don't know what you're talking about. When you say Torah, and you say Tanakh, and you say Midrash, and you say Gemara, I don't know what you're talking about because I do it my own way. And the beauty of Judaism is that we've been able to pass down this tradition from generation to generation to generation, with the Torah being the center of who we are. So we don't have the Holy Temple anymore. Instead, what we have is Torah. And if we don't continue to center around what we are around Torah, then the very fears that God had at the beginning when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel will come to fruition, will break up in different parts, and will no longer exist. So on a negative note, I can say that it seems like we have broken up into many different ways, but on a positive note, I wouldn't buy into that. Why? Because after 4,000 years, all these other people, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, the whoever'ites, they're gone. But who's still here? Us people who still put the Torah in the center of the room. And that was the goal from the beginning. That's why once they got to the land of Israel, it had to be that we worship God in the place that God chose. Okay, Shabbat Shalom. Well, we love Talmud too, but we just interpret it a little bit differently.
I didn't mean
it's
because
there,
so would people.
they might destroy it.
Exactly.
But the main fear there was the Jews would worship there.
Oh, they would make him the idol.
They would make him a god. Right.
Okay.
That was
and,
the fear.
And you were talking about the cities in the U.S. named Salem. I think the Puritans went there because they wanted freedom of religion. So they named it Salem.
Interesting. But not Jerusalem,
No.
which
but
is interesting.
Salem.
Yeah. But why not Jerusalem? I wonder if there's a reason. We could probably look it up.
I'll look it up.
Yeah.
Google it.
It's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
It's a real pleasure to hear Devar Tomer twice.